Try to expose me, and I'll make sure you're fired before sunrise. Then see how long your crippled husband and unborn baby survive without your paycheck.
7 months pregnant and still wearing yellow cleaning gloves, Nia Mensah stood before the company president while senior managers stared as though she had entered illegally. Only hours earlier, Mirai Components had discovered enough missing cash to threaten payroll, supplier contracts, and the bank credit keeping its factory alive. The woman everyone ordered to empty bins now held 3 handwritten numbers that might explain the crisis, but revealing them could also destroy her only income. Behind the glass conference room wall, Chief Accountant Park Seo-yeon watched Nia with a frozen expression that revealed something far more dangerous than embarrassment. The question was no longer why a pregnant black cleaner had entered the boardroom. It was why the chief accountant seemed terrified she had spoken. Stay with Nia's story, because every answer will uncover another secret, and the person treated as invisible will soon become impossible for anyone to ignore. If stories about dignity, sacrifice, injustice, and second chances matter to you, subscribe and turn on notifications so you can join us again. And while Nia waits outside that conference room, tell us in the comments what city, state, or country you are watching from today. To understand how a cleaner reached that locked boardroom, go back 8 months to a rainy rehabilitation ward in Incheon, where her marriage changed overnight. Nia had moved from Accra to South Korea 3 years earlier after marrying Hanjun Seok, a quiet logistics engineer she met during his assignment in Ghana. Before marriage, she had earned an accounting degree and spent 4 years reconciling shipping invoices, vendor payments, and customs records for an export company. She expected to restart her career eventually, but learning Korean workplace culture took time, and she chose first to build a home with Jun Seok. Then, a delivery truck crossed a wet intersection, crushed the side of Jun Seok's car, and left him with a spinal injury doctors could not easily predict. The surgeon saved his life. 2 weeks after the accident, Nia learned she was pregnant, turning their deepest fear and greatest joy into the same trembling conversation beside his hospital bed. Junse cried before she did, apologizing for an accident he had not caused and insisting she return to Ghana before his medical bills buried them. Nia took his hand and reminded him that marriage was not a contract for healthy days only, though privately she had no idea how they would survive. Their savings disappeared into rent, rehabilitation, medication, transportation, and uncovered therapy fees, while Jun Seok's disability payments arrived slower than their bills demanded. Nia applied for bookkeeping and junior accounting positions, but employers questioned her Korean fluency, local experience, pregnancy, and long absence from formal office work. One recruiter praised her degree, then suggested she wait until after childbirth, a polite rejection that left Nia smiling until the elevator doors finally closed. At home, she kept every expense in a small blue notebook, calculating which therapy session could be delayed without telling Jun Seok what she was sacrificing. When Mirai Components advertised an immediate facilities position with evening hours, Nia accepted before pride could invent another reason to wait for a better opportunity. The company manufactured precision electrical parts for overseas clients, employing fewer than 150 people but generating enough profit to appear comfortably secure. Nia told herself the cleaning uniform was temporary, yet her first morning revealed how quickly some people could turn another person's temporary hardship into identity. A receptionist looked at Nia's stomach, then at her dark skin, and asked twice whether she had entered through the correct employee entrance. Another worker handed her a coffee cup without speaking, assuming she would throw it away, although a waste bin stood less than 2 steps away. Nia swallowed those moments because Jun Seok needed therapy on Thursday, rent was due Friday, and dignity could not yet be deposited into their bank account. Her direct supervisor, an older facilities coordinator named Mr. O, treated her fairly and quietly, rearranged heavy tasks whenever he noticed her struggling with fatigue. That small kindness mattered, because the finance department occupied her evening route, and its chief accountant seemed determined to make every shift more difficult. Park Seo-yeon was 43, sharply dressed, technically respected, and famous for correcting junior employees in public before praising herself for maintaining professional standards. The first time Park saw Nia wiping fingerprints from a glass wall, she asked whether the company had lowered hiring standards without consulting management. Mr. O answered calmly that Nia was reliable and qualified for the facilities position, but Park kept staring as though reliability itself offended her. During the following week, Park repeatedly left food containers beside her desk after Nia finished cleaning, then summoned her back to remove them personally. She also complained that Nia's hair looked unprofessional, although it was neatly braided, and once suggested foreign workers should learn gratitude before asking for respect. Nia wanted to answer, but each time she pictured Jun Sok practicing painful leg lifts at home, counting on money she had not yet earned. Then one evening, while emptying recycling beside the finance printers, Nia noticed a discarded invoice whose vendor code looked strangely familiar from the previous night. She did not touch confidential files carelessly. Accounting discipline had taught her boundaries, but repeated numbers attracted her attention the way smoke attracts firefighters. The invoice showed Sioran Logistics billing 48 million won, while another discarded summary listed 47 million to a different supplier with the same bank suffix. Nia stared only long enough to recognize the pattern, then finished her work, wondering whether Mireille used shared banking arrangements or something less innocent. At home, Jun Seok noticed her silence and assumed Park had insulted her again because Nia had stopped repeating the worst comments after seeing his helpless anger. She changed the subject, opened her blue notebook, and calculated next month's therapy costs, while the suspicious bank digits remained stubbornly present in her memory. 3 days later, Mireille announced an unexpected delay in employee reimbursements, and Park blamed overseas customers for temporary cash flow pressure during a morning staff meeting. Nia heard the explanation while replacing trash liners outside the conference room, yet the company's loading docks remained busy, and export orders had not slowed. The contradiction bothered her professionally, but she reminded herself that she was not employed to audit Mireille, and curiosity could cost her family everything. That night, Jun Seok tried standing between parallel bars at rehabilitation, managed 4 painful seconds, then collapsed into his chair with fury burning across his face. He told Nia he was tired of being the reason she accepted humiliation, and asked whether love still counted when one person carried every practical burden. Nia answered that he was not a burden, but his question followed her to work, where Park had placed 3 overflowing boxes beside her cleaning cart. Park said the boxes needed moving downstairs immediately, although warning labels clearly required 2 employees, and Nia's pregnancy made the demand obviously unsafe. Nia refused for the first time, explaining that Mr. O had restricted heavy lifting, and Park's pleasant office smile disappeared before several watching employees. People in your position should be careful about becoming difficult, Park said, making the threat sound administrative while her eyes traveled deliberately toward Nia's stomach. Nia left the boxes untouched, but the victory carried a new question. Had she finally protected herself, or had she given Park a reason to target her? The next morning, Park reassigned Nia from quiet executive offices to washrooms, stairwells, and the loading corridor, increasing her walking without changing her scheduled hours. Mr. O questioned the change, but Park claimed visiting auditors required exceptional cleanliness, using corporate language to disguise punishment that everyone nearby understood. Nia completed the route slowly, resting whenever the baby pressed hard beneath her ribs, while coworkers passed without meeting her eyes or offering help. Only Choi Yoon-bi, a junior accounts payable clerk, occasionally filled Nia's water bottle and whispered that Park treated anyone without power as disposable. Yoon-bi never discussed confidential work, yet her nervousness whenever Park entered suggested the finance department carried tensions larger than ordinary office politics. One evening, Nia found Yoon-bi crying beside the copy room, holding a rejected reconciliation report covered with Park's red handwritten corrections and insults. Nia offered tissues instead of questions, but when Yoon-bi mentioned an unexplained vendor balance, Nia recognized Sioran Logistics and felt professional instincts sharpen again. She carefully asked whether Mireille frequently used several suppliers sharing one settlement account, phrasing the question like curiosity rather than an accusation. Yoon-bi looked startled and said vendor accounts were supposed to be unique, then immediately stopped talking after footsteps approached from the finance corridor. Park appeared, noticed them together, and ordered Nia back to cleaning before asking Yoon-bi why confidential matters were being discussed with facility staff. Nia had learned something important, but the answer created another problem. If the bank suffix truly matched, why had nobody inside finance challenged it? At home, she searched public company registration records on her phone and found Sioran Logistics existed, but its listed address belonged to a tiny office suite. She wrote nothing about Mireille in her notebook, protecting herself from possessing company information, yet she recorded the public address beside household calculations. Jun Seok watched her and asked whether she was trying to become an accountant again, his voice carrying hope that frightened her more than disappointment. Nia admitted only that numbers still made sense to her, even when the rest of life felt like something she could not reconcile. He smiled for the first time that week and asked her to promise one thing: never let anyone convince her that surviving had erased her education. The next shift, Nia noticed Park personally collecting printed payment approvals from a locked tray normally handled by Yoonbi, then carrying them toward procurement. Minutes later, procurement supervisor Lee Dae-hyun emerged from Park's office, avoided the main elevators, and left through the loading entrance after normal business hours. Nia did not know Lee, but she remembered seeing his signature on discarded freight summaries involving Seoran Logistics and another vendor called Hanseong Transit. The clue remained circumstantial, so she forced herself to keep mopping. Yet the finance corridor had stopped feeling like an ordinary workplace around her. Several days passed without another discovery, and the story might have ended there if Park had not made one careless decision after a late meeting. Near midnight, Park ordered Nia to clean her office immediately, then left with executives, forgetting a spreadsheet still visible on her unlocked monitor. Nia deliberately turned her eyes away, but as she wiped the desk edge, a printed payment schedule slid from beneath a folder onto the floor. She picked it up only to return it, and saw 3 transfers just below Mireille's internal threshold, requiring a second executive authorization. The amounts were scheduled minutes apart to Seoran Logistics, Hanseong Transit, and Daejeong Materials, yet all 3 displayed the same abbreviated beneficiary reference. Nia replaced the page exactly where it had fallen, finished cleaning, and left without photographing anything, because she still lacked authority to inspect financial records. But she now understood why payments were being divided, and the answer produced a more frightening question. Who had enough access to approve repeated transfers? The following morning, a supplier called reception demanding overdue payment, and Park loudly blamed junior staff for failing to maintain accurate cash projections. Yoonbi received the public criticism, apologized, and spent lunch alone, while Nia watched Park protect herself by making weaker employees absorb every visible failure. That evening, Nia found Yoonbi still working and quietly told her not to sign any document she had not personally verified, offering no further explanation. Yoonbi asked why, and Nia replied that an accountant's signature could become someone else's shield, a lesson she had learned years earlier in Accra. The sentence changed how Yoonbi looked at her, because until then she had known Nia only as the pregnant cleaner Park enjoyed humiliating. Before Yoonbi could ask about Nia's background, Park entered and demanded to know why 2 employees were wasting company time in an empty office. Nia calmly explained that she had finished her assigned route, but Park stepped closer and said cleaners were not employees she expected to hear arguing. Then Park knocked Nia's spray bottle from the cart, watched it roll beneath a cabinet, and ordered her to pick it up immediately. Several staff members saw what happened. Nobody spoke until Yoonbi bent down first, retrieved the bottle, and placed it gently back on Nia's cart. Park's face tightened, because a small act of kindness had become disobedience, and the hierarchy she relied upon suddenly seemed slightly less secure. Later, Yoonbi apologized for remaining silent before, and Nia told her courage rarely arrives perfectly formed. Sometimes it begins by picking something up. That moment answered whether Nia was completely alone at Mireille, but it opened another question. Would Yoonbi still stand beside her when real danger appeared? At rehabilitation the next day, Jun Seok moved his left foot several centimeters without assistance, a tiny improvement that made Nia laugh until she cried. Dr. Yoon Hae-jin warned that recovery would be slow and uncertain, but consistent intensive therapy could improve his chances over the coming year. The problem was cost. The most effective program required sessions their current benefits would not fully cover, leaving Nia to calculate hope against money again. She accepted 2 additional evening shifts, hiding the decision from Jun Seok because she knew he would hear sacrifice where she intended only determination. Her body noticed before he did. Swollen ankles, back pain, and exhaustion followed her through Mireille, while Park continued assigning unnecessary late cleaning. One night, after most employees left, Nia paused near the finance conference room because she heard Park's voice speaking in unusually sharp, hurried whispers. The door was not fully closed, and another voice answered through speakerphone, mentioning Friday, a final transfer, and documents that could not remain in the system. Nia froze beside her cart when Park said, "Move the last 180 million before payroll notices, then clear the reconciliation trail." The words transformed every earlier clue into one coherent threat, because Nia now knew the strange payments were not mistakes but deliberate concealment. She wanted to walk away immediately, yet the caller asked whether Lee had prepared the replacement vendor files, confirming procurement was connected to the scheme. Park replied that nobody would question routine paperwork, especially while executives believed weak exports caused the cash shortage threatening next month's payroll. Nia's hand tightened around her mop handle as she realized innocent employees might lose wages, while 2 managers prepared to empty the remaining cushion. Then Park's chair scraped backward, and Nia pushed her cart forward just before the office door opened into the silent corridor. Park saw her 3 meters away and stared at the untouched floor between them, calculating whether Nia had been cleaning or listening. Nia lowered her gaze, apologized for the noise, and continued toward the elevators while Park remained motionless behind her, without saying goodnight. Inside the elevator, Nia's hands began shaking only after the doors closed, because the question was no longer whether fraud existed but whether Park suspected her. At home, Nia said nothing until Jun-seok fell asleep, then sat beside the kitchen window replaying every sentence she had heard at Mireille. Reporting Park could save dozens of salaries, but being wrong could cost Nia the job paying for rent, medicine, therapy, and their unborn child. She considered contacting police immediately, yet she possessed no documents, recordings, or authorized records, only remembered numbers and a conversation heard accidentally. By dawn, she chose a narrower first step: preserve what she legitimately knew, observe nothing beyond her duties, and speak only when evidence supported suspicion. She wrote the 3 public vendor names from memory on a separate sheet, then searched corporate registries and discovered 2 shared directors with connected addresses. One director was Lee Dae-hyun's brother-in-law, a fact available through public filings but buried beneath layers of small companies and outdated registrations. Nia printed only the public pages at a neighborhood shop, keeping them outside Mireille systems, so nobody could accuse her of accessing restricted company records. When she arrived for work, Park was waiting beside the facilities closet, unusually calm, holding a revised schedule that assigned Nia exclusively to finance. The change looked like punishment disguised as trust, and Nia immediately understood its purpose. Park wanted to watch what she noticed and where she moved. Park asked whether Nia had enjoyed her late shift, then casually mentioned that office conversations sometimes sounded more dramatic when overheard without proper context. Nia answered that she focused on cleaning, but Park's smile sharpened because neither woman believed the conversation was actually about cleaning. Throughout the evening, Park invented reasons to enter rooms moments after Nia arrived, checking trash bins, locked drawers, and even the shelves of her cart. She found nothing because Nia had taken nothing, yet the surveillance confirmed Park's fear more clearly than any confession could have done. Near closing time, Park deliberately spilled coffee across a conference table and ordered Nia to clean it, while several finance employees finished reports nearby. As Nia worked, Park described immigrants who arrived expecting opportunity and then became resentful when their qualifications did not impress local employers. The words never named race directly, but Park glanced at Nia's skin while saying some people should understand the level society had assigned them. Nia straightened slowly and replied that employment level could change, while character followed a person into every office regardless of title or salary. Silence spread across the room, and Yoonbi looked down to hide a smile, while Park's expression hardened into something colder than ordinary workplace contempt. Park dismissed everyone except Nia, claiming the floor required additional cleaning, then closed the conference room door after the last employee left. She asked what Nia had heard 3 nights earlier, and warned that misunderstandings could become dangerous when repeated by people without professional standing. Nia said she had heard enough to know payroll was not threatened by weak exports, and Park's carefully controlled face finally lost its composure. Park demanded Nia's phone, accusing her of recording confidential conversations, but Nia refused and stepped backward toward the open side of the conference table. Park grabbed for the device, struck Nia's wrist, and shoved her shoulder when Nia pulled away, sending the cleaning cart hard against a cabinet. Nia stumbled but caught the table edge before falling, then felt a painful tightening across her abdomen that emptied every argument from the room. For several seconds, Park stared at Nia's stomach, frightened by what she had done, before ordering her not to exaggerate an accidental workplace bump. Yoonbi returned for forgotten keys, heard Nia calling from inside, and opened the door to find her bent forward gripping the table. Mr. O summoned an ambulance, while Park repeatedly insisted Nia had slipped alone, a claim that sounded less convincing each time she repeated it. At the hospital, monitors showed the baby remained stable, but doctors diagnosed stress-related contractions and ordered reduced physical activity for several days. Jun-seok arrived by wheelchair from rehabilitation, furious and terrified, demanding Nia quit Mireille before the company took something from them money could never restore. For the first time since his accident, their fear turned against each other. He called the job dangerous, while she heard him calling her choices reckless. Nia reminded him they still needed income, and Jun-seok answered that needing money did not require sacrificing herself to people who treated her as disposable. He apologized immediately, but the wound remained because both understood their argument concealed a deeper terror. Neither knew how much more their family could endure. That night, Jun-seok asked what Park had wanted from her phone, and Nia finally told him about the invoices, transfers, conversation, and public company records. He listened without interruption, then asked the question Nia had avoided. If she stayed silent and workers lost everything, could she live with that choice? Nia looked at the fetal monitor beside her and realized safety did not always mean retreat. Sometimes silence simply transferred danger to someone else. The next morning she called Mr. O, requested copies of the incident report, and asked whether conference room security cameras recorded the doorway and corridor. He confirmed cameras covered the entrance, though not the room interior, and said Park had already pressured him to classify the event as a minor slip. That answer gave Nia something she had lacked: independent proof that Park was manipulating facts around the same time she was hiding financial misconduct. Rather than confront Park again, Nia requested a private appointment with company president Kang Min-jae through his executive assistant, stating she had information about payroll risk. The assistant initially redirected her toward finance, but Nia calmly said finance was the reason she could not use the normal reporting channel. Within an hour, Kang agreed to 10 minutes before his next meeting, mostly because a 7-month pregnant cleaner requesting direct access after an ambulance incident seemed extraordinary. Nia returned to Mireille wearing a simple maternity dress instead of her uniform, carrying only the public registry pages and her small blue household notebook. Park saw her enter the executive floor and immediately stepped from her office, demanding to know why facilities staff were approaching the president without permission. Nia answered that she had an appointment, and the word unsettled Park more visibly than any accusation could have done. Before Nia reached Kang's door, Park called security and claimed a recently injured contractor was attempting to access confidential executive areas while emotionally unstable. The security manager checked Nia's appointment, refused to remove her, and quietly asked Park to return to finance unless the president requested assistance. For the first time, Nia watched Park's authority fail in public, but the small victory lasted only seconds before the conference room doors opened. Inside sat Kang, the operations director, legal counsel, and 2 senior managers already discussing emergency cash shortages that had surfaced that morning. Nia realized the crisis had arrived sooner than expected, because a major supplier had suspended shipments after Mireille missed a scheduled settlement payment. Kang asked why she believed payroll risk involved finance, and Nia began with what she could prove, rather than what she feared. She showed the public corporate filings connecting vendor directors, described the repeated beneficiary suffix she had noticed on discarded summaries, and identified the split transfer pattern. The operations director interrupted, asking how a cleaner understood approval thresholds, vendor reconciliation, or beneficiary coding well enough to recognize any meaningful pattern. Nia explained her accounting degree, 4 years of export finance experience in Ghana, and the career pause that followed marriage, immigration, and Jun-seok's accident. Kang studied her for several seconds, then asked why she had accepted cleaning work instead of presenting those qualifications when she was hired. Nia answered that bills did not wait for employers to believe in her, and Mireille had needed a cleaner faster than anyone needed her accounting experience. That response changed the room, but legal counsel still warned that suspicion required verification before accusations could be made against senior employees. Nia agreed, then repeated Park's exact sentence about moving $180 million before payroll noticed and clearing the reconciliation trail. Kang's expression shifted because $180 million matched an unexplained transfer request, awaiting final processing in the company's banking portal that morning. He asked the question from the future scene Nia had not known would define her life. How had his finance department missed what the cleaner recognized? Kang immediately ordered the pending transfer frozen, restricted finance system access, and called Mireille's outside audit firm before anyone in the room contacted Park. That decision answered whether Nia's warning mattered, but it created a larger question. Had they stopped the theft in time to save the company? Legal counsel asked Nia to remain available as a witness while IT preserved system logs, bank records, approval histories, and deleted file backups. Within 20 minutes, Park discovered her access had been suspended and marched toward the executive floor, demanding an explanation in front of startled employees. Kang met her outside the conference room and said temporary controls were being implemented during a cash review, revealing nothing about Nia's statement. Park noticed Nia seated behind the glass and understood immediately, but she forced a laugh and asked whether management now accepted financial advice from cleaners. Kang replied that he accepted verifiable information from anyone. then asked Park to surrender her company laptop and phone until the review concluded. The humiliation Park had inflicted on others returned without shouting. Employees watched security escort her to collect personal belongings under legal supervision. Yet Park was not defeated, because before leaving she accused Nia of stealing confidential documents and inventing allegations after their workplace disagreement. The accusation complicated everything, since a fraud investigation could collapse if evidence appeared contaminated by unauthorized access or personal retaliation. Nia calmly repeated that she had taken no Mirai documents, produced only public registry records, and invited IT to examine every device she owned. Kang's legal counsel accepted the offer but said investigators would rely on independent records, protecting both the company and Nia from unnecessary exposure. By afternoon, outside auditors confirmed 3 suspicious vendor accounts shared banking details, despite apparently unrelated ownership, matching the pattern Nia had described. They also discovered multiple transfers had been split beneath secondary approval thresholds, but records still did not prove who controlled the beneficiary accounts. Park's username appeared on several approvals, although she claimed junior staff prepared transactions automatically and she authorized them based on procurement documentation. That explanation shifted attention toward Lee Dae-hyun, who had unexpectedly called in sick and stopped answering his company phone after access controls were imposed. Police were notified after counsel found evidence of possible embezzlement, while Murray's bank placed temporary holds on remaining transfers linked to the suspicious vendors. News of the investigation spread through the building without details, creating rumors that the company was insolvent, closing, or preparing mass layoffs. Employees who once ignored Nia now watched her pass with curiosity, but she returned to her cleaning route because nobody had changed her employment yet. Mr. O tried to send her home, citing medical restrictions, but Nia insisted on finishing only the lighter duties her doctor had specifically permitted. She needed normal work to steady herself, although nothing felt normal when the finance corridor became a sealed evidence area guarded by security. Yoonbi approached quietly and admitted Park had instructed her months earlier to overwrite vendor references after payments, claiming system migrations required temporary corrections. At the time, Yoonbi obeyed because each request appeared routine, but she had preserved several email instructions after fearing she might later be blamed. Nia told her to contact legal counsel immediately and not discuss the emails with anyone else, turning private sympathy into a decisive act of courage. Yoonbi hesitated, afraid of losing her career, and Nia reminded her that silence had already been designed to make junior employees carry senior mistakes. That answer helped Yoonbi choose, and her archived emails soon gave investigators a timeline connecting Park's instructions to Lee's procurement approvals. The evidence answered who had manipulated vendor records, but one mystery remained. Where had the money gone, and could Mirai recover enough to survive? Meanwhile, Junsuk learned about the executive meeting from Nia and reacted with pride mixed with fear, asking whether Park could retaliate outside the company. Nia admitted she did not know, so Kang authorized temporary transportation support and changed her work schedule after legal counsel assessed the situation. The company's response was practical rather than heroic, but for Nia, it marked the first time Mirai treated her safety as worth institutional protection. 2 days later, auditors asked whether Nia could explain the payment pattern she had noticed without reviewing restricted documents she had never been authorized to access. She sketched the logic from memory: duplicate beneficiary suffixes, split transfers below approval limits, inconsistent freight vendors, delayed liabilities, and unusual reconciliation timing. One auditor then gave her a sanitized sample ledger unrelated to the investigation and asked how she would test for duplicate or concealed vendor payments. Nia described matching bank accounts across vendor IDs, tracing creation dates, comparing approval users, checking invoice sequences, and reconciling cash movements against legitimate purchase orders. The auditor looked at Kang and said quietly that Nia's method was not guesswork. It reflected professional training that had remained intact despite her career interruption. Kang asked whether she would help the audit team temporarily with non-investigative reconciliation under supervision, with written authorization and appropriate hourly compensation. Nia accepted only after confirming the work would not interfere with her pregnancy restrictions, because proving herself no longer required pretending her body had no limits. Her first assigned task involved ordinary supplier reconciliations, yet she found a discrepancy that had existed for months and saved Mirai another unnecessary duplicate payment. The discovery was unrelated to Park's fraud, which made it more important professionally. Nia demonstrated value even when no dramatic conspiracy was involved. Employees began seeing her leave the facility's closet carrying a laptop instead of a mop, though her temporary badge still identified her as cleaning staff. Park, suspended pending investigation, sent a formal complaint accusing Mirai of discriminating against her by trusting an unlicensed foreign employee over experienced Korean management. Legal counsel answered with documented audit findings, while Kang ordered managers not to discuss race, nationality, pregnancy, or employment status as substitutes for evidence. The irony was impossible to miss. Park had used status prejudice against Nia, then attempted to hide behind procedural fairness once scrutiny reached her. Investigators soon traced vendor payments to accounts controlled through shell companies connected to Lee's relatives, but several transfers had already moved overseas. Mirai recovered the frozen $180 million immediately, yet more than $900 million remained missing from earlier transactions. The company could survive if its bank extended credit and suppliers resumed shipments, but both demanded credible financial controls before taking additional risk. Kang therefore faced a choice larger than punishing Park. He needed someone trustworthy enough to rebuild systems while outside auditors reconstructed the damage. His existing finance team contained capable employees, but morale had collapsed, and several staff members feared their signatures had been used without informed consent. Nia suggested interviewing each employee separately, distinguishing intentional participation from procedural obedience, rather than treating the entire department as guilty. During one reconciliation session, Nia discovered several legitimate invoices had been duplicated accidentally years earlier, revealing how weak controls could resemble fraud without careful verification. She insisted the team separate honest mistakes from intentional manipulation, because accusing innocent employees would destroy exactly the trust Mirai was trying to rebuild. That discipline impressed the outside auditors more than dramatic accusations, showing Nia understood accounting as evidence, process, and responsibility, rather than instinct alone. Kang began inviting her to morning cash meetings, where Nia translated complex shortages into practical choices about suppliers, payroll timing, and inventory commitments. Each meeting quietly answered another workplace assumption. The woman once excluded from professional conversation could explain financial risk more clearly than several senior managers. Still, Nia refused to become the company's inspirational mascot, correcting executives whenever they described her promotion as a miracle instead of delayed recognition. She had not become intelligent after entering the boardroom. The boardroom had finally been forced to notice intelligence that existed beside its trash bins. Kang asked why she cared about people who had often ignored her mistreatment, and Nia answered that justice became revenge when it stopped distinguishing responsibility. Her response impressed legal counsel, but it also unsettled Kang, because Nia was demonstrating leadership before anyone had offered her authority. That evening, Jun Seok apologized for asking her to quit after the hospital incident, admitting fear had made him mistake protection for control. Nia admitted she had hidden extra shifts and medical exhaustion from him, meaning both had been making decisions alone while claiming to protect the other. They agreed that partnership required uncomfortable truth, and Jun Seok promised never again to measure his worth only by what his body could provide. Their marriage did not magically heal, but the conversation changed its direction from guilt and rescue toward shared decisions about whatever came next. At Mirai, the next question was approaching quickly. If Nia could help stabilize finance, would the company still send her back to cleaning afterward? 3 days later, Kang invited Nia to a formal meeting with human resources, outside auditors, and the finance director temporarily assigned from another division. He explained that Mirai could not promote someone simply for exposing wrongdoing, because gratitude was not a substitute for professional qualification or governance. Nia appreciated the distinction, especially when he offered a structured assessment covering reconciliation, controls, cash forecasting, vendor risk, and management judgment. She completed the written test after work, pausing twice when the baby kicked, then submitted answers without asking anyone for special consideration. The outside auditor scored her technical work above several experienced applicants Mirai had recently interviewed for a vacant senior accounting role. Her weakness was current Korean tax procedure, which Nia acknowledged directly and proposed addressing through certification training rather than pretending expertise she lacked. That honesty mattered to Kang, because Park's greatest professional failure had not been ignorance. It had been using authority to hide what others needed to know. Meanwhile, police located Lee attempting to leave the country through Busan, carrying devices later linked to shell company accounts and encrypted payment instructions. Under questioning, Lee denied stealing money but admitted Park had designed the split transfer system and promised him a share for approving false procurement records. Investigators recovered messages between them discussing payroll timing, deletion windows, and the final 180 million won transfer Nia had overheard. The criminal evidence no longer depended on Nia's memory, answering the question of proof while opening the equally urgent question of Mireille's financial survival. Park was arrested on suspicion of embezzlement, breach of trust, and falsifying business records after investigators searched her home and identified concealed account access. The news stunned employees who had feared her for years, yet Nia felt no triumph watching footage of Park entering a police vehicle. She remembered the shove, the comments, and the humiliation, but she also understood that accountability was larger than enjoying another person's collapse. Kang gathered employees and explained only verified facts, promising protected reporting channels, an independent control review, and no retaliation against witnesses or junior staff. He publicly thanked Nia for raising concerns responsibly, without revealing confidential investigative details, forcing the company to recognize someone it had previously overlooked. Several employees apologized privately for laughing at Park's comments or remaining silent, and Nia accepted some apologies without pretending the past had disappeared. She told one coworker that embarrassment could become useful only if it changed what people did the next time someone weaker was being mistreated. The bank agreed to extend Mireille's credit line after auditors confirmed the frozen transfer, insurance claims, and recoverable assets substantially reduced the projected loss. Key suppliers resumed shipments under revised payment controls, meaning the company would survive, although margins and bonuses would suffer for at least 1 year. That survival became the first major payoff employees could feel immediately. Payroll cleared on time, factory shifts continued, and no mass layoffs were announced. But Kang knew surviving the scandal was different from rebuilding trust, so he asked Nia to join a temporary financial controls task force. Over the next week, she worked beside auditors and accountants who once barely noticed her, mapping approval gaps that allowed Park to dominate information. Yoonbi disclosed every questionable instruction she remembered and was cleared of intentional wrongdoing, then reassigned into a properly supervised accounts payable role. Nia recommended separating vendor creation from payment approval, requiring independent bank detail verification, and installing automatic alerts for duplicate beneficiary accounts. She also proposed a protected escalation channel, allowing junior employees to question unusual transactions without routing concerns through the manager being questioned. Kang implemented the recommendations immediately, and auditors told the board that Nia's control design addressed weaknesses more effectively than several expensive consulting proposals. Then Human Resources asked Nia to attend another meeting, where a new employment contract waited beside the yellow facilities badge she still carried. Kang offered her the position of acting chief accountant, subject to board confirmation, background verification, continuing education, and completion of the external investigation. Nia did not answer immediately, because the title she once believed she had abandoned now sat within reach while her cleaning shoes remained beneath the table. She asked whether the offer existed because Mireille needed a public redemption story after discrimination complaints, forcing Kang to confront an uncomfortable possibility. He answered that publicity might follow, but the appointment would stand only because auditors had documented her competence and the finance team trusted her judgment. Nia requested one additional condition. Mr. O and facilities staff should receive clearer workplace protections, so dignity would not depend upon someone eventually becoming management. Kang agreed to review company-wide conduct policies, and Nia signed the contract only after reading every clause carefully, exactly as an accountant should. When she returned her yellow cleaning badge, Mr. O refused to treat the moment like an escape from shame and reminded her honest work had sustained her family. Nia kept the badge instead of discarding it, placing it inside her blue notebook as proof that survival work had never reduced her worth. Her first morning as acting chief accountant, employees stood when she entered the finance meeting because protocol required it, creating an almost unbearable reversal. Nia asked everyone to sit, then began by saying titles should make information safer to speak, not make the person holding them harder to question. Yoonbi smiled openly this time, while several older accountants exchanged surprised looks before opening the new control procedures Nia had prepared overnight. The status payoff was satisfying, but the story did not end there. Nia had won authority, and now she had to prove she could carry it. She reorganized workloads, restored delayed reconciliations, and spent 2 hours daily studying Korean tax rules with a certified advisor provided by the company. Whenever uncertainty appeared, she asked questions publicly, deliberately modeling the behavior Park had punished and proving that leadership did not require pretending omniscience. Her salary more than tripled, finally covering rent and basic rehabilitation, yet the most advanced treatment Jun Seok needed remained financially beyond their reach. Kang learned about the medical situation only through Human Resources Benefits review and asked legal counsel what support Mireille could offer without creating improper favoritism. The board approved a documented retention package including a medical assistance grant, expanded family insurance, and rehabilitation support tied to Nia's executive-level responsibilities. Nia initially resisted, worried employees would see the package as payment for silence about discrimination, but counsel showed equivalent assistance structures used for senior critical hires. She accepted after the terms were written transparently. Understood, refusing legitimate compensation would not make her more ethical or more deserving. Jun Seok began intensive neurological rehabilitation the following Monday, entering a program with robotic gait training, aquatic therapy, and longer supervised mobility sessions. At his first session, he managed 2 supported steps, then looked toward Nia through tears and whispered that their child might someday see him standing. Nia answered that walking would be wonderful, but being their child's father had never depended on whether his legs obeyed him. Those words began healing something Jun Seok's doctors could not measure, because he stopped treating recovery as repayment for the sacrifices Nia had made. At Mireille, Nia's first month brought fewer dramatic discoveries but harder leadership decisions, including correcting employees she personally liked and defending those she barely knew. She discovered one senior accountant had ignored warning signs around Park, not from corruption, but from fear of losing a mortgage-dependent salary. Rather than dismiss him automatically, Nia documented the failure, removed approval authority temporarily, and required ethics training before any future supervisory role. Some employees called her too forgiving, while others called her too strict, teaching Nia that authority created criticism even when decisions were carefully reasoned. Her pregnancy advanced into the 8th month, and Human Resources repeatedly reminded her that Korean law and company policy allowed protected maternity arrangements. Nia kept postponing the discussion, telling herself finance was still unstable, and nobody else understood the reconstructed control system as completely as she did. That belief contained a dangerous echo of Park's leadership. If a department could function only through one person, then the system itself remained weak. Yoon Bi challenged her gently, asking whether Nia truly wanted employees to question authority or only wanted them to question everyone except her. The comment stung because it was correct, and Nia spent the evening redesigning responsibilities, so no critical process depended entirely upon her presence. She appointed 2 deputies with separate control areas, documented procedures, scheduled weekly remote reviews, and required every emergency decision to leave an auditable trail. The change answered whether Nia could lead differently from Park, but another threat arrived from outside the finance department during a board review. One elderly board member questioned whether an immigrant cleaner promoted during a scandal possessed enough local credibility to represent Mireille's financial leadership long-term. He praised Nia's courage before suggesting a more traditional Korean executive could take over after stabilization, leaving her as a senior analyst. The phrasing sounded polite, but Nia recognized the old message beneath it. Useful during crisis, acceptable behind the scenes, unsuitable once respectability returned. For several seconds she felt exactly as she had beside the elevator, after that recruiter suggested pregnancy should postpone her career indefinitely. Her old instinct was to smile, leave quietly, and prove herself somewhere else rather than ask people determined to underestimate her for permission. Instead, Nia opened the board packet and presented 90 days of corrected controls, recovered cash, supplier stability, audit results, and measurable error reductions. She acknowledged her remaining certification work, then asked the board to judge whether any identified weakness had prevented her from performing the actual role. The outside audit partner confirmed Nia's department had achieved the strongest reconciliation accuracy Mireille had recorded in 4 years under independent review. Kang then reminded the board that replacing proven leadership for appearance would recreate the same culture that allowed uncomfortable information to remain unheard. The board voted to confirm Nia permanently as chief accountant, with continuing education requirements applied transparently and documented like every other executive condition. Nia left the meeting without celebrating until the elevator doors closed, then touched her stomach and laughed at how familiar that private space felt. Months earlier, an elevator had hidden her rejection tears. Now another elevator held the first quiet moment when she fully believed her career had returned. That evening she showed Jun Seok the permanent contract, and he asked whether she finally understood why he had never believed cleaning erased who she was. Nia teased that he had spent several months believing paralysis erased who he was, and both laughed because the truth no longer needed gentleness. Their humor marked another kind of recovery, less visible than walking but equally important to the home their child would soon enter. 2 weeks later, Jun Seok stood with parallel bars for almost 1 minute, then completed 6 assisted steps while Dr. Yoon monitored his balance. His recovery remained incomplete, and nobody promised full mobility, but measurable progress replaced the hopeless certainty that had dominated their first months. At 35 weeks pregnant, Nia experienced stronger contractions during an afternoon meeting and finally admitted that leadership did not require attending every crisis personally. Her doctor ordered immediate rest and warned that continuing long office days could trigger premature labor, forcing Nia to test the system she had built. Kang proposed 12 months of company-supported maternity leave under a customized retention arrangement, with full title protection and optional remote executive work after medical clearance. The package provided salary continuity, benefits, and authority without requiring Nia to work during recovery, leaving her free to choose limited remote involvement later. Nia feared stepping away might invite someone to prove the board member had been right, revealing how deeply years of professional interruption still shaped her. Yoonbi answered that a department depending on Nia's physical presence would prove her controls had failed, while a functioning team would prove her leadership succeeded. Nia laughed at hearing her own philosophy returned by someone once afraid to retrieve a spray bottle in front of Park. She accepted leave beginning immediately, delegated authority, and walked out of Mireille carrying no mop, no laptop, and no apology for protecting her pregnancy. At home, her first week of rest felt strangely difficult because silence left space for memories she had outrun through work and responsibility. She remembered Park's shove, strangers judging her skin, recruiters dismissing her pregnancy, and nights calculating which therapy session they could still afford. Rather than treat those memories as proof of victimhood, Nia wrote beside them in her blue notebook what each hardship had taught her to change. Beside discrimination, she wrote, speak earlier. Beside isolation, build allies. Beside financial fear, create reserves. Beside leadership, never make questions dangerous. The blue notebook that once measured scarcity became a private management philosophy, transforming another survival object into something larger than its original purpose. Jun Seok continued rehabilitation while Nia rested, and their evenings shifted from hospital bills toward baby names, feeding schedules, and arguments about crib assembly. He could now transfer from wheelchair to chair with minimal help and stand briefly using a walker, progress that made ordinary household plans feel miraculous. One night he told Nia he wanted to meet her halfway when she returned from the hospital, even if halfway meant only 3 supported steps. Nia told him their family had stopped measuring love and distances long ago, yet she secretly hoped he would achieve the promise for himself. 3 weeks later, labor began before sunrise, calmly at first, then quickly enough that Jun Seok forgot every breathing technique they had practiced together. An ambulance took them to the hospital, where Nia spent 11 exhausting hours in labor, while Jun Seok remained beside her holding the same hand. The birth was difficult but uncomplicated, and their daughter arrived healthy, loud, and furious at the bright room surrounding her. They named her Sina, a name they had chosen because both liked its sound, without burdening the child with any symbolic duty to heal them. For 12 weeks after Sena's birth, Nia performed no company work, following medical advice while her deputies ran finance using the controls she had documented. The department closed 3 monthly cycles without material error, proving Nia's absence did not weaken her authority. It proved she had built something durable. After medical clearance, she chose limited remote leadership from home, joining scheduled reviews while keeping the 1-year maternity arrangement, protecting her title and salary. Mireille provided secure equipment and flexible hours, allowing Nia to review controls during Sena's naps, without turning motherhood into another test of endurance. Her compensation remained at the chief accountant level, including the retention package, because the board now treated her professional value as measurable, rather than charitable. Yoonbi became one of Nia's strongest deputies, eventually presenting monthly reconciliation results directly to executives, without lowering her voice when senior managers asked difficult questions. Mr. O received updated staffing protections and lifting protocols for pregnant or injured facilities, employees, changes Nia considered as important as any accounting reform. The company also created an independent ethics channel, making it possible for cleaners, interns, drivers, and executives to report concerns through the same protected system. Those reforms did not erase what had happened, but they changed the conditions that had once allowed humiliation and financial misconduct to reinforce each other. 6 months after the investigation began, prosecutors presented the recovered messages, account records, shell company filings, and approval logs against Park and Lee. Park ultimately pleaded guilty to major financial offenses after evidence connected her directly to fraudulent transfers, while Lee cooperated in tracing additional concealed funds. Court-ordered recovery and asset seizures returned another substantial portion of Mireille's losses, strengthening the company's finances without pretending every stolen one came back. Nia attended no sentencing hearing, because by then Park's punishment no longer defined what justice meant to her or where her attention belonged. She cared more about the employees receiving salaries, the suppliers trusting Mireille again, and the daughter sleeping against Jun-Sok's chest during remote meetings. Jun-Sok's rehabilitation also continued without miraculous shortcuts, moving from parallel bars to a walker, then short supervised distances using forearm crutches. Some days his legs responded well, others brought spasms and frustration, but he stopped treating difficult sessions as evidence that recovery had failed. At Sena's 8-month checkup, Jun-Sok walked from the waiting room chair to the examination table using a cane in Nia's steady arm. He paused halfway, laughing through tears, because the distance was shorter than their apartment hallway yet longer than anything possible after his accident. Nia did not tell him she remembered his promise to meet her halfway. She simply moved beside him at the pace he could manage. Near the end of Nia's 1-year maternity arrangement, Kang asked whether she wanted to return full-time, continue hybrid work, or redesign the role permanently. The question itself mattered because nobody assumed motherhood had ended her ambition or that gratitude required surrendering control over her family life. Nia chose a hybrid schedule, 3 office days and 2 remote days, with flexibility around Jun-Sok's rehabilitation and Sena's childcare needs. On her first day physically returning as permanent chief accountant, she arrived early enough to watch the lobby lights turn on across polished floors. A new facilities employee pushed a cleaning cart toward the elevators, and a manager impatiently stepped around her without acknowledging the space she needed. Nia held the elevator doors, helped guide the cart inside, and greeted the woman by name after reading the badge pinned to her uniform. The employee looked surprised that an executive knew her name, and Nia recognized the expression because invisibility had once felt normal to her too. Upstairs, Nia opened her blue notebook before the finance meeting and found the old yellow facilities badge still tucked inside the back cover. She placed the badge beside her chief accountant identification card, not as evidence of how far she had risen, but of what had always been true. Her ability had existed while she scrubbed conference tables, her dignity had existed while others mocked her, and her intelligence required no title to become real. The title mattered because it finally gave responsibility equal to her competence, and Nia intended to use that responsibility differently from those before her. During the meeting, Yoonbi reported a vendor irregularity detected by the new automated system, and nobody punished her for raising a question that proved harmless. Nia thanked her anyway, because a false alarm investigated honestly was safer than a real warning buried beneath fear of embarrassing powerful people. That afternoon, Jun-Sok sent a video from rehabilitation, showing 12 careful steps with a cane, while Sina squealed from her stroller beside the therapist. Nia watched it twice in her office, then closed the screen before tears could blur the quarterly forecast waiting for her signature. 1 year earlier, she had cleaned that same office floor, while wondering whether her family could afford another week of therapy. Now the company she helped save was paying her fairly. Her husband was recovering, her daughter was thriving, and her work protected other families. Yet the happiest change was quieter. Nia no longer entered rooms hoping people would eventually discover her worth, after first deciding she did not belong. She entered knowing her responsibility, asking hard questions, listening to weaker voices, and refusing to let another person's prejudice become her private definition. Before leaving, Nia returned the yellow badge to her blue notebook, zipped her bag, and switched off the finance office lights herself. Then she walked downstairs to Jun-Se, waiting with his cane and Sina in his arms, and together they went home without owing anyone an apology.